Hi guys, happy Friday. Give me a second here to make sure that everything is working properly and that you can see and hear me, and then we'll get started. Okay. Okay, so everything there seems to be working. So today we're going to be painting a pretty countryside inspired scene that includes a wall, so we can use that nice wall painting technique from this month's lessons. And this is going to be kind of a make it up as you go type scene, which leaves a lot of room for making it your own. So we've got some of the usual supplies here today. I've got my 1/2 inch angled shader, my size 6 filbert brush, I think it's size 6, no, size 8 filbert brush, size 4 liner, and size 4 round brush, and size 2 liner. Gosh, my brain has stopped working. And then I've got a fluffy brush just for dabbing on a bit of texture onto the wall, or whatever we might want to use that for. Colour wise, I've gone really basic. We can do a lot with the basics, so that's what I have chosen for today. I have my 3 primaries. This is primary red, primary yellow, and primary blue, and then permanent or titanium white and ivory black. These are all the colours, apart from the middle green, these are all the colours in the 6-piece Winsor & Newton mixing set. So it's a great place to start with, like, a nice basic set of primaries. They mix a really nice combination of colours. I've also got the burnt sienna, just in case I want a little bit of brown. We can mix brown with these, but I find it so handy to have the burnt sienna about, just in case I don't want to mix. And if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to use the live chat. I will try and check it as often as I can to see what questions you have and answer any that are there. Okay, so because this is kind of a make it up as you go, I'm going to start with a little bit of a loose sketch just to mark in the rough locations of things. That way I know that I'm not painting my sky where my wall is going to be, and I'm leaving a little bit of space for everything that I want to include on the page. So we want this kind of space for a wall. So I'm just going to mark in maybe like a big area for the wall. And I want the wall to be nice and close up in the foreground. And then I kind of want to do a little bit of just a irregular blocky wall, but then at this end I'm going to put a chunky stone in, like they use for the gate posts. So this is going to be one big stone, and then this is going to be filled in with lots of little stones. And down at the base here, we're just going to put some flowers bordering the bottom, maybe peeping out past the side. In the background, we're going to have quite a little bit of distance. So we're going to have the sky, but then we're also going to have, I'm going to pop the horizon in maybe like a little bit under halfway up the page. Then maybe there'll be some sort of trees showing up there in the distance, and maybe some kind of mountains far away. So we get this nice sense of depth. And then just a little bit of space for some clouds. And then this is going to be like our closest field that we can see around the edge of our gatepost. So that gives us kind of a little bit of a base to get started with here. And nothing has to be perfect. And like I say, this is just a guide. It just gives us an idea of where we're going to pop all of these different areas of colour. Because to begin with, we're just going to kind of block in the base layer for the wall. We can do the sky. We can get some greens and stuff in place for where the foliage is going to be in the foreground. So nothing super detailed to start off with. So I'm going to start in the very background with the sky. So for that, I want the white, I want some of the primary blue, and a little black. So with our nice wide brush, we're going to mix a pale blue for the sky. We're going to make this a nice sunny day, so we can be quite punchy with the blue. It doesn't have to be too pale. You could always kind of switch the sky out if you wanted to create more of a moody scene. Go with just greys and black and white in there to create a moodier sky. But we get enough dull skies here as it is, so I'm going to paint a nice bright sky today. I've got a nice big pile of that here on the palette, and I'm just going to fill in everything above these most distant marks. And I'm working in an A5 sketchbook today. It's a little bit bigger than normal, just so we've got plenty of room to create these nice textures. Sometimes it's nice to be able to spread out a little bit. So as I'm running out of this colour just a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and just add some more white to it, just so we get this slightly lighter effect above the mountains there in the background. And I'm just going to overlap that line ever so slightly. So that when I add those next layers, it fully encloses this sky at the bottom there. And we have a nice base layer there for our sky. Or over the top of this, we can add a few clouds. Don't want to go crazy with clouds. Like I say, this is going to be a beautiful sunny day, but we can pop a couple in. And for this, we want just a little bit of white. Now I've dried that brush off quite well so that the paint is going to be quite sticky. It's not got any extra moisture added, and I'm just spreading it in the brush quite nice and evenly at the end, so I don't have a big gloopy bit of paint. I'm just going to have a little bit to add some clouds, and this we don't really need to fuss with too much. I'm just going to add these kind of soft loose shapes in a couple of places across the background. And you'll find that when your mixture is quite dry and sticky like this, you get a bit of texture rather than just kind of clean brush strokes, which is nice for clouds. Maybe a little bit there. And then in this most distant section, I'm just gonna add a few that are gonna peep out from behind the mountains and the clouds, just popping in some horizontal marks and then just taking the point that has not so much paint on now and just making that top edge a little bit textured. Just so we've got some clouds there in the distance. Nothing has to be too perfect. And if you've got any lines that you're not quite happy with, or if you've got any sort of hard edges with the brush strokes, it's easy enough to take either your large brush or your smaller round brush if you want a little bit more control, and make sure it's nice and clean and quite well dried, and then just fuss a little bit at any hard edges to soften them ever so slightly. We don't have to get too persnickety about clouds though. They can very quickly become overworked, and I'd rather see a brush stroke or two than pull my hair out trying to make a cloud perfect. We are painting after all, so it's okay that we see a few brush strokes. Okay, so over the top of our pretty sky, next we'll layer some distant mountains. And these are going to be the most distant kind of land-based feature in the scene. And for these, we can make them quite far away. So we're going to use blued grey, or greyed blue, however you want to look at it. I'm just going to add a tiny touch of black in there. So we get this kind of soft colour that's perfect for these far away details. And I'm taking my large brush again and just going over that bottom edge of the sky, making sure we get all that enclosed. And we want to bring this down to the wall. Just overlapping our line for the wall slightly so we can make sure we don't end up with any bare spots. Although the bare spots are not the worst, we can always come back and fill them in. So now it depends on how far away we want these mountains to appear. Really far away mountains we could leave kind of this bluish grey. But if we want to give them a little bit of the impression of being slightly closer, maybe we could see a hint of green. If these are hills or mountains with trees on, then we could go ahead and add that. But you can leave them just as kind of a blue-grey to show that they're really quite far away And I've got just a little bit of thinner paint right there. I'm just gonna thicken that up. If you've done the layered landscapes tutorial, there's one in that collection that has kind of like distant mountains over some water, and it's painted in this similar effect. I'm just going to fill that in so we've got nice opaque coverage there. Oh, if we're going to add a little bit of kind of green detail, we need to decide what direction the light is coming from and keep that consistent throughout the scene. In this case, I'm going to have the light coming from somewhere over here on the left. So it means that all of my lighter details will be over on the left side of the mountains and these trees that we add a little closer to keep that nice and consistent. So for the greenery, if we're going to pop a little of that in, I'm going to take some yellow into this dark grey mixture. It's got all the blue in there, so it'll mix with that. Got a little bit of black to grey it, so it keeps it on the same plane as the mountains. And then it's got the white in there that's going to give it that same sort of cloudiness. And any kind of green tone, even if it looks kind of muddy and vague, will work to give these mountains a little bit of extra dimension. So we keep these lighter details on the left sides of the mountains. And just create these little patches that have this little bit of that hint of green. And you can bring them down wherever you add these. You're showing that light is hitting the ground here. And you don't have to think too much about this because we've got a couple of things going on. We've got, we don't really know how high the sun is. Maybe it's quite high in the sky. But there are a few clouds around, so, the pattern of these lights doesn't need to be super perfect. Then maybe these mountains have got different species of trees. Some are lighter, some are darker. So we can just dance around with this colour, adding this hint of light here to create that dimension. And I don't have a lot of paint on the brush at a time here, just enough to layer over that blue that's there. Just a few little bits dotted around, and that's enough for that. When you do this, green, because it has the primary yellow in there, tends to shift a little bit as it dries. So if you find that your marks are not really as visible as you would like them once it's dried, a little bit more white in that mixture will help just to lift them slightly. But this is a thing that you can come back to once everything has dried. Green is so sneaky like that. Okay, so over the top here now, so everything this side is going to be wall. We're just going to sneak in some sort of closer trees here on the right, and because we're coming closer now, we want to deepen the values here. That means less white in there when we mix up our colour. So I'm going to start with a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue. Now this is going to make a really super bright punchy green, way too bright for what we need. We don't need anything nearly that bright. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grey this colour ever so slightly, because we do want to push it back a little bit. The more we grey a colour, the more it's going to appear further away. So I'm going to add a little black in there. It's going to help to deepen that colour as well. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of white. So we've greyed it, but we've done it separately with the black and then the white. But we can see already how much darker this colour is than the green that we used in the distance. So I'm with my large brush again, or you can use your smaller round if you prefer. But as we've got kind of this like chunk to fill in, I always like a larger brush, even if those first shapes end up a little blocky. I don't mind going in with my more rounded brush to kind of make this top edge a little bit more interesting and open. We're just going to create the shape here of these trees in the background. And I'm going to bring these down to somewhere there. I don't want them to come all the way across and cover the mountains. I'm filling that shape in there. So we've got a good base layer. So now I want a little bit more of that colour to break apart that top edge, make it look more like trees than green rocks. So I'm going to take my round brush that's really quite fully loaded. There's plenty of paint in there, and it means that I can just kind of dance around with these little blobby marks to create these sort of more open impression of the branches at the edge of these trees. And when you do this, you want to create like a really natural variety of shapes and heights and patterns, and this is far easier in theory than in practice, because I don't know about you, but I tend to repeat the same shapes over and over again by complete accident. So I have to be careful about that. But what I tend to do is sort of go around all of these edges with this sort of wobbly, broken pattern. And then I'll go back and see what I can change to bits that look too similar to others. Just bringing that across to wherever we decide it's going to end. Okay, so it doesn't look bad at that, but I've got this very distinct sort of angled line and I don't really like that. So I'm going to make one of these here a little bit taller. Bringing one of these shapes up, crossing over those distant hills. And then I'm gonna change the shape of this one ever so slightly. Just so we've got a few little different shapes. I don't want it to look too samey, but it's so easy to sort of end up with a tall one, then a short one, then a tall one, then a short one, or ones that all look the same sort of rounded shape. So I like to just make adjustments until I don't see those repeating patterns. And here on the right, I'm going to have maybe one leaning in, so we can't see the whole tree. But maybe it's a tall one, just peeping in at this side. Okay, so we've got our base for our trees. Now we want a little bit of shadow down here at the bottom. I'm going to use this same mixture but a little bit darker for that. So it's going to be the yellow and the blue and the black and white again, but a little bit more on the black this time. I'm gonna pop in some shadows down here at the base first. Just creating that hard edge of shadow around the bottom where it meets the ground. And then as we move up, the shadows can get a little bit more indicative of the individual trees and the texture as well. And what we want to do here is we want to split all of these kind of little lumps that we've created into individual trees. So we can start off by choosing just one, and I'm going to choose this one here because it's right in the middle and I can see all around it. And I'm going to create the texture and the shadow of this tree down at the bottom here. So I want to continue the shape of this down into these shadowy areas with this same sort of texture, just to create a little bit of dimension down here. And then we do the same with another one. And when we do this, it kind of sorts out what stands in front of the other trees around them. So having this one pulls this right to the front because we can see all of the shadowy details, and we know that this tree here is behind this. So we just kind of move around and decide where the next one is. So I'll do the same to this next sort of shape, adding this bit of shadow. I don't want to come right up to this, the one that I've just done though, because I want to leave a little bit of that light so that we can still see that shadowy edge of that one that's in front. And then the same for the others. And it doesn't matter which ones are in front and which ones are behind, just that they've all got a little bit of this sort of dimension in there to make sense of these shapes down here at the base. And when you've added these shadows in, you can go ahead and adjust any that look a little bit too similar, because we've got all of these different shapes and sizes, and we've got these lines of shadow that are kind of all consistent. So pick one and just fill it in so that it kind of smushes it in with the one next to it. It confuses those shapes together and we get a sense of something slightly different happening there. So I'm going to take my round brush and make any small adjustments, just areas that I want the texture to be a little bit softer. I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush off and make sure that I don't have like any extra moisture in there, and we can actually use this to soften some of those lines. Now when you do this, we've got two edges of these shadows. We've got the right hand edge, which is the more defined shadowed edge of the tree, and then we've got the left hand edge of the shadows, which is just where the shadows start on the tree itself. So this one on the tree itself, the left hand edge of the shadows, is a really good one to soften. By creating more of a gradual gradient from light to dark, we can help to show the rounded shape of the tree. And then that right one we leave as nice and hard edged. But it's really forgiving. It doesn't really matter, because we've got such a lot of confusing shapes all together. It doesn't really matter if you get one wrong, because, you know, there's so much going on here that there could be another tree in front of all of these that is catching the light differently, and that's why the shadows look as they do. So don't worry too much about it looking perfect. Effects like this that are built up with textures are generally best painted if you can kind of unfocus your eyes, or even if you can sort of snap a picture of what you're painting with your phone and then take a look at your phone from a little bit of a distance away, because it forces you to look at the thing as a whole rather than just focusing in on a few small details, which is so easy to do. I am fortunate that I'm nearly always recording what I'm painting. So I've always got a little tiny screen to look at my image through, which really helps for creating textures where you want the overall impression to be more important than, you know, perhaps the individual brush marks. So I'm just gonna, I've got this little kind of smooth bit there. I'm just gonna tuck a couple of shadows in there, and then soften that out just so it's not quite so bare. So we've got some light and shadow there, a little bit of dimension on these closer trees. We can go ahead and add a little bit of light onto these if we want. So that's gonna have the green mixture that we started with, just gonna be a little bit lighter. So instead of black, we're gonna add more white this time. And when we do this, we want these light marks to be kind of the fewest. I'm just gonna check the color here, see how it shows up over these shapes. Like I say, the greens are a little bit funny because the yellow tends to shift so much as it dries. It can sometimes take a couple of attempts to get the right value. So I've added a little bit of extra white to that. And I'm just going to go in and highlight a couple of the left-hand edges of the bushes. So exactly like we've done with the shadows, just we're going to be doing it on the other side. And this is a really nice way to kind of make sense of a little bit of these darker areas. Just pop in a little bit of light up there, a little bit on these ones that stick up. And I'm just overlapping that painted edge ever so slightly, just so that I get the lightest bit sticking out over the sky there. Okay, so we've got this, I don't know if you can see, but when the shadows were blended down here at the bottom, we've ended up with this kind of almost an outline there that's got that little shadowy edge behind, but that looks like it could be a good bush to me. So I'm going to take this lighter colour and I'm just going to create that left-hand edge of a bush there, using that same sort of wobbly stroke, just filling back just a little bit to give it some a little bit of extra paint there. Then I can take that clean damp brush and just run over that with the same rounded motions, just to blend it in ever so slightly. We end up with a little bush just tucked in the foreground. You can even go ahead with your shadowy green, pop a couple of deep shadows underneath to really bring out the shape. And when you do this, if you don't have a shape like that that you look at and go, oh, that looks like it could be a bush, then just make one wherever you like. You can fill in a large space in the same way, just like this. I'm just taking my clean damp brush here and just softening that right hand edge of the lighter colour, just so that it doesn't stop so severely. Finding a little bush shape like that we can bring out is one of the reasons why I often don't make sure that there is even coverage of the paint, just because when we've got even coverage, when everything is a nice flat colour, you lose those little suggestions, and I find them so helpful. I find it's almost like a collaboration with the paints. It's not you having to come up with everything. It's sort of you looking at what is going to look best on the page, or what the page is telling you will work in those spots. And I'd rather work with what's there than try and paint exactly what I want and fight the whole way. I've just added a little bit of lightness on that one there as well. And that's enough for this little bit of foliage here. Okay, so let's put in the base layer for the wall here and let that dry. Then we'll fill in these areas around here. So with this wall, I'm going to start off with just black and white. Oh, and a little bit of green probably, because my brush is very green. Maybe it'll be a slightly moss-tinged wall. Okay, that's a little bit less green. So I'm going to create some space here on the palette. And then I can create my greys a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to grab my white and then a little of the black. I'm just going to stick a bit of fresh paint out for this. Okay. Alright, so with a wall, you know the drill. You're going to create this lovely kind of interesting layer for the background to start off with. So I've gone for a fairly neutral grey here. And I'm just going to fill in this area first. And I'm going to leave this kind of rough right down at the bottom because I want the grass and the wildflowers to overlap this wall. At the top edge, I'm not really thinking about the different block shapes yet. I can do that in a moment. Just getting a little bit of that grey on. And I'm going to leave kind of like a few bits where the greens can come up and overlap. So I'm not filling this in completely evenly. The only thing that I will bring down is just that post. Just so I've got a nice defined edge there for that. Okay, so we have a little bit of paint on here. Now we can go ahead and add a little bit of variation, a little bit of texture. We can create some shadow in the wall, so I'm darkening up down at the bottom a little bit. I'm not being particular about this. We can get rid of any mark that we don't like later on. Just gives us a nice, interesting base to work with. I'm going to pop out a little bit of burnt sienna, I think, so that I can introduce some browns into the wall. I don't want dark browns really, so I'm going to use the burnt sienna with a little bit of white. For like a tan colour. Pop this on my big stone as well. And then I have kind of left this edge of the stone here defined. For no other reason than it helps to keep eyes on where that is located. So I'm going to take my fluffy brush here and just kind of dab a few little spotted groups on. I'm going to take the black, maybe the brown. This mixture has a little bit of white in there, just because there's white on my brush. And I'm just going to take that in the tip and just dot on some spots. These don't need to make any sense or be anything in particular. It almost looks like that when you get like the lichen that grows on rock, that get the like all that little speckled texture. Okay, so I'm going to take my size 4 round brush for a little bit more control here. And I'm going to mix a light grey like these stones at the top. And I'm just going to adjust the shape at the top into something a little bit more irregular. So I'll leave that first bit, but then here I'm going to create, maybe there's a stone that'll come up. And then there'll be a flatter stone. But then maybe there's one that sticks up a little further. And we'll make sense of all of these marks when we do the outlines. Make a really crooked one in there, I think. Okay, so we've got a little bit of variety there. So I'm going to let that all dry before I go over it with the shapes for the for the individual blocks. And while that's drying off, we're going to go ahead and fill in this bit down here, which is going to be the base for our flowers, and then this little bit of field back to the tree line there. See if I can get all this muddy colour out of my brush now. Oh yes, that's good enough. Okay, so we're gonna go with yellow and a little blue for green. And then I'm going to lighten that up a bunch with white. So I'm going to pop the lightest grass in the very distance, and I'm just going to mix just a tiny bit off to the side here and just pop a little bit of this grey in there. Like with the background, the grey pushes the colour back so that we just get the impression of this grass being a little bit further away. I'm going to put the grass in with horizontal strokes. Then I'm just going to grab a little bit of whatever kind of muddy greens I've got. And my brush has still got a lot of that light colour in, so it's not going to be super dark, but it means we can mix in a few little bits of shadows in the grass there, and differences in that green colour. So as I get closer here, I am going to darken this colour up. But we've got that nice sort of paler green there in this field. I'm going to darken this up with a little bit more blue. And a little bit of black. That's gone a bit too dirty. I think I got too much white in my brush there. I want the colours down at the front here to be more saturated, so I'm just gonna clean my brush out and do that again. Making a bit of space here. In fact, I'm just going to switch out one of my waters. I always kind of check to see how much white I've got in my brush by swishing in my water, but my water has so much white in now I can't see anything. There we go. Because it's amazing how much white your brush can have sneaking in there. Okay, let's try that again. And going to pop out some fresh yellow and the blue. I find the primary blue in this set to be really nice for making kind of bright summer skies, and it makes nice secondary colours, so the purples and the greens. But I find the blue by itself is quite a weak blue. It doesn't seem to have much opacity. Despite it being indicated as an opaque colour, I don't find it to be particularly opaque. Okay, so let's do a green that's going to work down here in the foreground. And I'm gonna, now that I've made this fresh pile, I'm gonna start along here and we'll work back to that spot. So I want a nice, some nice greens that are gonna work for a base layer for our flowers. I've just popped a little bit of black in there to deepen it up, just so that it's not super bright. I'm going to bring that down here, and I'm just going to brush this over that bottom edge of the wall in a little bit of texture. Just so that when I come to create plants and grasses down here, I haven't got a hard edge to cover. And this deeper green gives us a nice base layer here for this. So when I get to this area on the right here, I'm going to switch from these upward strokes to those horizontal ones again, so that any of the streaking or any unevenness looks like just a bit of shadow and light in the ground there. And then I want to transition to those paler colours. So I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white adjacent to this darker green, so that I can begin to lighten it up to blend back into those colours. A little bit more yellow and white here to lighten it one last time, to blend in. And we've created this sort of soft impression of that grass getting further away towards that tree line. We can also go ahead and take a little bit of this nice bright colour, because it's got that white in there, it's nice and opaque. Got a bit of yellow just to make sure that it's nice and warm. And we can pop a little bit of flatter grass just down here at the base of the wall, because we've got our wall kind of starts there, so we can have like maybe a little patch of flatter grass underneath. This will mix with the greens that are already there, and that's fine. You get this kind of soft lightening of the greens down here. And then we'll make more sense of that as we add the details. Okay, so let's hop back to this wall now. And now we've got our base layer there is all dried. We've got all of those lovely textures. We can go in now and add the contours of the individual stones. So for this I want a grey colour. I don't mind if it's just a true grey from black and white or a little bit brown. But I want it to be grey, not black. I don't want it to be super harsh. I don't mind going over these marks again with a deeper colour if I want to do darker separations. Like down here at the bottom, we'll be able to have some lovely pockets of shadow, but I don't want them same kind of deep marks up here at the top. So I'm going to start off here by just picking out those shapes that I've created at the top of the wall here. Just outlining. Those ones. That we started with. And like in the how to paint the wall, we're just going to outline them and then fill those little gaps between. And you can make these whatever shapes you like. I'm going for something quite higgledy-piggledy. And I don't mind leaving like bigger pockets of shadow, especially for an uneven wall like this. Now where you start to interact with your green overlapping down here, you can just finish your shadow marks at the green. I do love drawing or painting walls like this. It's so nice just to tinker about with the shapes and the textures. And I'm pretty sure that you would never get two walls the same. And looky there, we look like we've got a wall already. Okay, so I'm just going to sneak around and fill in those little pockets of shadow. When you do this, if you find that you reactivate the lighter colour underneath, just let it dry before you add more dark in these shadowy spots. Okay, we've just run those shadowy lines just into that grass ever so slightly, so that if we do get any little bits peeping through the grass, then that will look right. Ha! Now we can go ahead and create a little bit of light and shadow on these. And I'm going to switch to my larger brush now. This is the size 4 round, just so I can hold more paint at a time for adding these shadows. So I'm going to take the same kind of deeper mixture, maybe pop a little blue in there, because why not? So it's like a deep bluey grey. Then I want a bit of extra water in there because I want this to glaze rather than be an opaque colour. So with this nice wet mixture on the brush, I've worked a lot of it out just so that it's not sopping wet. I don't want to fill this with water, but it is still a wet mixture on the brush. And then we can just go ahead and dot around the bottoms of these stones to create some of these pockets of shadow, to create those little areas of unevenness at the bottom of these stones. And again, don't worry too much about how that it all looks initially. We got to get that paint on the page before we can edit it into something that looks better. I'm going to put plenty of shadow down at the base of this taller one. I like this nice light edge right there though, so I'm going to leave that. Just scraping a little bit of this on. Because this is a wetter mixture, you do run the risk of it reactivating that colour underneath, so I like to keep it to a couple of strokes and then that's it, move on. I can always come back and add another layer if I want to, but otherwise if we start to reactivate that colour, then everything gets a little bit too light and we got to wait for it to dry then anyway. Okay, so we got a bit of shadow on these rocks. I'm going to pop some lights on. This is going to be a little bit of white here. Maybe a little bit of the burnt sienna in there, just so it's not bright white. And this I want to be the opposite of the wet shadow mixture. I want this to be quite dry, so that when I load my brush I can squash it down and let the bristles spring apart to create more of a texture than a defined stroke. And I'm going to pop these on at the tops of some of the blocks. Now that mixture's got a little bit more white in there. It's probably going to show up better. I like to keep this quite a dry mixture, like I say, to create the texture, but when you find that it's difficult for the paint to get off the brush, it just wants a little bit more water in there. I'm just popping a highlight across the top of these top ones. I like to pop just a little bit of highlight across that top edge, but then kind of a scribbly mark further down, so we've got something a little bit interesting somewhere else where the rock is catching the light. So with a bit of light and shadow, our stones have all got some dimension now, albeit a little bit rough. But it's a good place to start for blending. I'm going to take my brush and clean it out. And then I'm just going to whip around the stones to soften the marks together a little bit. Now when we do this, we don't want to hang around with this, because the more we fuss, the more it's going to reactivate that light layer underneath, and we kind of lose everything and the stones go back to being smooth. We don't really want that. We just want to kind of let a little bit of moisture allow the paint to do its thing. So instead of sort of thinking about what's there on the stone in terms of what have I got to blend, think about it as maybe just popping a layer of water on the stone. And then all of these marks that were quite harsh get to soften together. And we don't need to soften everything, because with stone, if we have a harsh line, it means a hard edge on the stone. But if we have a soft change in colour, it means that maybe there's a curve in the stone there. So we still want that variety of marks. And this is the time, if you do have any marks that you really don't like, you can blend them away to nothing here. Just allow them to mix with that light colour underneath, and they will go. And then for the bigger stone, we're going to do the same thing. Just kind of introduce water and let all that paint move around. And I really do treat it like I'm trying to layer the water over the top rather than use the water to push the paint around. Think about sort of how light that touch is. I'm going to take, because this is a bigger stone, I don't want the variation and the texture to be so kind of bitty and small. So I'm just using the brush on its side to try and get some larger areas that I've smoothed out a little bit. I'm going to let that dry and just touch that up as needed in a moment. I've just seen I've got a little bit of a flicker on the stream. I'm sorry if you can see that. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry. Don't want to keep reactivating all of those colours. But while I do, while I wait for that, I'm just gonna darken up the shadows between the rocks that are lower down here. A little bit of just black to deepen up these ones at the very bottom. Back with the liner brush for this as well. And there's some really nice big pockets of shadow here in the middle. And what I think we're going to do there is I think we're going to punch a hole through the wall and show just a hint of that green behind. Okay, so these ones here in the middle, those ones there, I'm gonna make a little bit of a green like this green here, and I'm gonna pop that in there. Now we want to make sure that when we do this, it's below that line there, so we're still in the field. I'm just going to take out all of that shadow. I'm going to let that dry, and I think we're going to want to lighten that up. It's mixed quite a lot with the dark colour that was there. I'm going to pop one lower down as well. Add a bit more white in this mixture, I think, to start with. And as tempting as it is to just go over this before it's dried, I'm not going to. I know better. We'll see. We'll sort that out once it's dried, so we can show that little bit of field peeping through. Okay, so now the wall is mostly dry, we can begin to add some of this greenery down here at the bottom. And I'm going to start off with a similar colour to this green that we started with. So that's the blue and the yellow. It's got a little bit of black in there and just a touch of white. And I'm going to use this to create some silhouettes, sort of the background layer silhouettes. So these are just going to be really simple shapes to break apart that where that green overlaps. So think about this as individual blades of grass, maybe some leaves grouped around a stem. Nothing too complicated or big. Just some of those little leafy shapes that you might find here. And you can stick this all the way across the bottom here. I've added a little bit more black to this mixture to allow it to stand out. I don't mind if it's a little bit darker than what's there already. I'm going to add some little leaves growing up here, a little stem. We just want that kind of little bit of wild overgrowth where these don't get trampled down if it's a field with animals in, or where the farmer can't quite mow if it's for grass cutting. And a few little of these shapes down at the bottom here too. I've popped in a stem that I can add some leaves to. And a lot of these textures, there's a really nice live class that we did in the past that has got like a same sort of environment, except it's a broken down fence in a farmer's field, I think, and that's full of lovely textures like this. Popping a little bit more black in. I'm going to pop some more blue in as well. Cool this colour right down. And I'm going to brush some sort of pockets of shadow, especially above this light that we've added. Just brushing up, so we've got some areas of deepest shadow down here. And a little bit around the base of the These greens always dry a little bit lighter than when they first go on, so they can look quite scary. but having that little bit of white in there and the yellow means that they do soften back. I'm just going to pop a couple of shadows in on the grass down here, and these marks they will get blended to soften them in. It just means we get this nice dance of light and shadow. So cleaning my brush off, hi, yes, there will be a replay. You'll be able to watch this whenever you like. Brambles, you could definitely put brambles in here. That would be a great addition. There's plenty of brambles around here up against the farmers' walls at the minute. So I'm just going to take my clean damp brush and just blend that top edge where this darker colour has come up. It darkens everything back up and it looks a little bit scary at first, but it lightens up once it's dried. It just means that we don't have that super harsh line where the brush strokes end. And you can use the same clean damp brush to blend in the marks down here at the bottom. So we have a nice little bit of overgrowth there. I'm going to go ahead and just pop in a few more details just across this bottom edge here, and I want these to be coming from behind that stone so that I can leave that beautiful light edge in. I'm going to use the same dark colour so that it's silhouetted nicely against the field. And I'm just going to pop in some grasses, maybe a couple of sort of leafy things. And use that nice dark colour to highlight that lovely lighter edge. So this hole through the wall, I can go lighter, I can go to white, but I think it's fighting with the values in the stone. So I think I'm going to fill that back in, because even if I lighten this with white to make it really pop, it's still going to be fighting with these lighter edges. So I'm going to nix that idea, and I'll think about that for a future wall idea. I'm just going to pop. Maybe if it was a darker wall, like this side was in shadow. I'm just layering that dark colour over. I'll probably add another layer of dark in a moment. I can still see the hint of green there. Okay, so we've got a little bit of texture and variation in these greens down here. Now we can go ahead and mix in a few flowers and a few more defined features over this base layer. So let's start with some lighter leaf textures that we can use. We're gonna pick out this edge where the light meets the shadow. We want to bring that edge to life. We also want to add some of these lighter textures through this darker area, because that's just our base layer. These are all the things that we can't quite see. So I want a nice pale green. And I'm going to use this to create some texture first along this lightest edge. Just a few little things that are being more illuminated to bring that edge to life. And we don't need this everywhere, we can kind of dot this. We don't want to create one continuous line, otherwise it becomes a bit too visually jarring. But a few little clusters of these textures really help. And this lighter colour gives us the most impact where it goes over the darker greens. So that's always a good place to concentrate the marks. I'm also just going to pop a little bit, because this is slightly lighter than that green that's below, I'm just going to pop a little bit of this this colour in with a kind of just a rough texture down here at the bottom. Just so that these few marks isn't the only place that colour shows up. Okay, so I'm going to deepen this up ever so slightly because this is very, very light. Just mixing it with this darker green that's on the palette. To dull it ever so slightly. And then we can pick out some of the shapes further up. Maybe we could have just some little clusters of leaves. And really we're just trying to create these layers of nice textures. Then we can throw in a few blades of grass too. The beauty about patches like this that are always overgrown and a little bit wild is that there's always a really nice mixture of different things. So we can do different textures and create these little patches of different plants. Although one thing I tend to find is that there are certain types of plants that thrive in environments like this, and they quite often seed year after year. So you get particular plants that crowd these little spaces. And I've just added something leafy growing up there, just because it silhouettes nicely against the dark of the stone. Maybe a few wilder grasses. And I'm going to take just a little bit of this colour flattened on my brush, and I'm going to use this to pop just a tiny bit of texture in these patches that are close by. These spots where you would perhaps see a little bit of the grassy detail. I don't want it to fight with what's here, but it's just a nice way to pop in a little bit of suggestion of some grasses. So I want a few more wild little tiny marks. Maybe these are little brambles, or maybe they're just those longer grasses gone to seed. I'm going to take a little bit of black, a little bit of blue, and a little bit of yellow for a nice dark green. Just on my liner brush, so I can pop in a few little bitty things. Growing up the back of the wall. You can also add the hint at some little bits of moss, and I'm just going to grab my filbert brush for this. It's just going to help me make those nice sort of rounded little smushed bits of moss. So I want a green that's not super bright. I'm going to take whatever is left of this darker green. I'm just going to pat a little bit on a couple of the stones. I don't want to go crazy with this, just a few that have got that hint of green. Maybe this tall one has a hint of the green as well. Okay, so we've got some texture, we've got some plants. Let's pop in some flowers. And I'm going to put my red out for this so I can add some nice vibrant colours. And I'm going to do a mixture of, I think, pinks and oranges. Maybe a bit of purple, but you could do whatever colours you like. Okay, so I'm going to start off with some nice orange. That's just red and yellow with a tiny bit of white in there. And pop some little groups of pretty orange flowers. And I'm not going too detailed with this. These are going to be blobs with maybe some highlights added after. And I want to add them in clusters, but not all over. I don't want them to look too evenly spread. Maybe we'll have one peeking around from the corner here. And then we'll go with some pink. just going to take my red and lighten it with white. And that's quite a bright pink. I'm going to just dull it with a touch of blue. So it's not quite so fluorescent. And then we'll tuck this in. Maybe we'll make this one a tall flower. I'm just following these marks round, kind of like an imaginary stem. We can go back and put a stem in. And same again, just dotting these around, trying not to paint them in too regularly. And I do love a bit of crisp white when we've got busy textures like this. So I'm going to take a little bit on the tip of my brush, just spread it in there evenly because it's quite thick. And that is not crisp white, that has got the pink in. Try again, a little bit of crisp white. And you could do daisies, or you could do cow parsley. I like the cow parsley because it's another variation on a texture. So instead of these larger round flowers or the taller flowers, we get these little clumps of speckles. I'm just adding these little like curved clusters of white dots. And I think that just adds a really pretty contrast in there. And I was going to add one at either that end or that end, but you know, maybe that would spread them out too evenly. So maybe I'll just leave those ones as they are. I'm going to take just a little bit of this white, just in the tip of the brush now that it's clean. Work it in there so that it's not a blob of paint, so that it can mix with that bit of moisture in the brush. And I'm just going to use it to glaze just a bit of extra light over the tops of these uppermost stones. And I'm just running it over any of the shadows that come up too high, just to get rid of them. We don't need those shadows right at the top. And at that, I think we're pretty much done. We can go ahead and pop in just a couple of dark stems for those little plants. I'm going to take yellow and black for a deep green. And my liner brush just to tuck in a few deep little stems dancing between these flowers. And it's just a really subtle detail just to stop your flowers from hovering. You can even use this dark colour just to add a hint at maybe some leaves or something on these down at the bottom here. And this will soften up as it dries, so it doesn't stay quite as dark. Just means we can weave in a few little pockets of those deepest shadows. And I just pop those shadows in wherever I want a little bit more depth at the base of the plants. You can put them in texture, like creating leaves and stems, or you can just brush it in roughly and then just soften it into those colours that are around it. Whatever suits the kind of space that you're working with. I don't want to obscure those lighter details that I've placed in front. And at that, our pretty wildflower wall is finished. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson today, and I'd love to see if you have painted along, or if you get round to painting it. Please do share in the group. Thanks so much for joining today, guys, and I shall see you next time.